to Black Terms Podcast. Thanks for tapping in with us again, y'all. On Black Terms is brought to you by TandemEd, where we are living, learning, and leading alongside community. TandemEd is a consulting organization that exists as a healthy bridge between community and institutions. I'm Jason Rivers, Senior Leader with TandemEd, and also the National Director of our flagship initiative, Own Your Story. I'm co-hosting today's session episode with none other than our CEO and co-founder of TandemEd, Dr. Brian Barnes, who happens also to be the husband of today's special guest. This episode, we'll be talking about parenting in our community. Our special guest, Keishana Barnes, she's an educator, wife, mother with over 20 years. Over the past 20 years, she has studied and worked in the field of education and has witnessed and experienced firsthand the frustrations that exist amongst many of our families, especially, families of color. And I also wanted to know, so welcome, Keishana, to today's session episode. Also wanted to acknowledge that you are a PhD student. So, you got to break that down for those that may not know what that means. But welcome to Black Terms. We're excited to have you today to get to know more about you and the great work that you're doing. So, and where you're doing it at and all those things that can be impactful to our community. So welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's good to be here. And I see that we got some power to keep my husband on mute over there a little bit. So that's kind of cool.
Oh, I can come off mute now.
Oh, okay. I thought they said you get to stay on mute today. Okay.
Yeah, we know he's coming. We know he's coming. So, Keishana, could you just tell us a little bit about, yourself, your passion, what brings you to this conversation today, and how this can be beneficial to, all of our listeners out there?
Sure. Again, thanks for having me. I think that, I'll just kind of give my background. I am a career-long educator. So I'm one of those people that it feels like it's very rare. It's more and more rare these days. Someone who grew up wanting to be a teacher. That's what I always wanted to do. And so, went to college and majored in special education and child development, and then went on to get my master's degree and taught for, many years, and then did some other work in public schools with mentoring and, special education administration and written curriculum. And so just different things, different roles in the schools. And then, once I became a parent, then I added that role on as far as working with young people and parents in a different way. And so now I actually teach future teachers. So I work at the University of Memphis, and I teach in our teacher prep program there. So with young people who have decided to do this as well, to go into this work. And I'm also a parent of 3 children. And so I'm very involved in their education and in their lives. And, I've served in the past as our PTO president, things like that, just really getting into things. And also work with other parents too. So other parents that might not have this type of, the background and the understanding that I have as far as, some of the policies and the language and just how schools work. And so I just will help parents out, especially around issues with special education and just kind of how to navigate certain spaces. So that's in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it, but that's a little summary of it.
Man, whole lot going on there, whole lot that we love too. Today's conversation and the work that you do is so important to us. As we think about, the particular nuances for, Black families navigating educational systems and the specific challenges and barriers that we may see, and protecting the brilliance and innocence of our children. Hats off to you for all the work that you're doing. I'm particularly interested in hearing a little bit more about this work that you talk about, some of the parent groups that you've worked with. I believe it's in Memphis. Can you talk us a little bit about, exactly what you're doing? I think there was 2 different portions of work that you've done, one around, the pandemic, and then, another form of work as well. So could you just talk a little bit about that? Because, we really want this time and this conversation to be another resource to Black parents, maybe future parents or people that are going through things now. And we just believe heavily in the assets of who our community is. And we know our greatest asset is our children, and how do we protect who and what they are. So can you talk a little bit about that work?
Sure. So that's my role in the one role I forgot to mention earlier, my role as a PhD student. And so I am pursuing, a doctorate degree in educational psychology and educational research. And so part of this, part of my, requirements is to, conduct research, to learn how to conduct research and then to conduct research. And so I've been a part of different, projects here and there. And so I have my own kind of little project kind of going on right now that I'm working through. And then I'm a part of a team. And both projects it's called qualitative research. So it's really, looking at the people's stories and trying to understand, getting data from, data is not numbers in this, in this case, data is really kind of understanding people's experiences and how they interpret their experiences and their perceptions of things, and just kind of hearing it from them. And so two different projects. So one is a research project where myself and a couple of other colleagues, we're interviewing mothers here in Memphis of all different racial backgrounds. Let me think. So we were looking at moms who worked outside of the home, and who have children, elementary age children, and to learn about their experiences, like when the pandemic hit, and what happened to them, how did they experience life and everything. And so we're still in the midst of conducting this research. We're going to do follow-up interviews to kind of see like 6 months later, like how are things going. But just some of the like preliminary things that we've kind of like seen as happening is that, and this is going to seem very much like, of course, but is that, it was a struggle, it was a big struggle, for these moms. And we're in this study, we're looking at some gender kind of issues there, because they're also, I should say, they're heterosexual married couples. And so kind of like looking at just the role that different parenting roles that kind of happened, being at home, still trying to work full time, and what it looked like to parent during that time. And so, one of the trends that we've also seen is that the moms really felt it was helpful to talk about it. And so, and that really just kind of matches, with this idea of, not that I'm a therapist in any way, right? But like just this therapeutic act of talk, like just getting it out, like talking about what's happening and seeing that there's others experiencing something similar, and what all does this mean? So that's that. Now, my other work that I'm doing by myself is interviewing African-American moms of, intellectually gifted children. Now, we can certainly talk about this term intellectually gifted and what that means and whether it's a, real thing or not, and how it's determined. But for my research purposes, it is, children who have, scored in a certain amount on an official IQ test. So interviewing moms to kind of understand their children's schooling experiences. And what's interesting is that there's so many kids who, if they are considered gifted, they're also considered what we call like twice exceptional. And so it's children who have other exceptionalities or /abilities along with, giftedness. And, one of the main things I'm learning from doing these interviews is just how misunderstood a lot of Black kids are. And so, and this just, again, tracks well with, just what I've seen like in schools, all over. So for example, in schools, it's highly more likely that, a Black child might get referred to or might be thought to have an emotional behavior disorder, or even, being referred to like a type of intellectual disability, right? Mm-hmm. When in reality, some of these same behaviors may be attributed to some other type of like neurodivergent existence, so it could be intellectual giftedness, it could be, ADHD, it could be lots of other things, but they get kind of pigeonholed into this one, label. And with this particular label, unfortunately, comes a lot of other really negative things, that happen. So my research is trying to like just uncovering that and like looking and see like how moms are dealing with it, so that we can kind of work to help education situations to be better. So the idea is to say we're going to the parents, right? We're going to the parent voice, and this is often very absent from research. The student voice is absent and the parent voice is often absent. In fact, if I go to do what's called like my literature review, if I go to kind of find, okay, what studies have been done involving, Black moms, I could scroll and scroll and scroll, and the studies that I'm going to see are all, if I put in like African-American mothers, right? African-American moms, it's going to be like these negative kind of things. It's going to be studies that have to do with, the struggles of this, or this is bad, or these moms, are more likely to do these things. I can't find, it's like really hard to find people who, in this field who are conducting research from a perspective of, these people have knowledge that I need in order for me to do my job better, for me to understand, what I'm doing better. Unfortunately, it's just not seen that way. So my work is kind of like twofold, right? Like I'm trying to get the information, but I'm also kind of trying to look at how I'm getting the information and everything.
Man, so love the trend setting and the interruption that you're doing in the midst of, some very important research. And there's so much stuff to chew on, that for, the things that you were bringing up that definitely would love to see, us elaborate on the conversation. I was thinking about the subjectiveness of the application process, even how, or excuse me, not application, but the identification process. How, students are selected for gifted programming, and, the ways that, the challenges and barriers for Black children and Black parents in those spaces, so I was also thinking about, oftentimes, and of course we, want to hear from you, but in my experience as an educator as well, even in more predominantly Black schools or school districts, these gifted and talented programs tended to be a space where more white students were, where Black children would be a minority in. And so, just even in those public school settings where it was almost like a school that happens inside of a larger school, and then what challenges and pressures, Black children face inside of those spaces, and what parents go through. So when you talk about research being tied to stories, I think that's so profound. When you talk about the support for Black parents in both of your processes, I think that's super dope as well. So just curious and interested to hear, what those things will yield. And it's just such an important work, but we can dive into that more. I know my brother B has some good questions for you too. So I'm not gonna hog the mic, man. Let me go ahead and mute myself.
Well, let me just say, first of all, I'm excited to be on this call for two reasons. One, this is my spouse, my wife, and really proud to have this conversation with you, Keishana. So just following up on the conversation. We're really big on, as you know, owning our story, our communities owning our story, and ensuring that, our truths are told in the way that that represent us. So back to the conversation about parents. What do you find to be some of the misconceptions that are running rampant about who our parents are, and then alternately, what do you come to understand as being like the truth and the assets of what our parents are bringing within our communities with our children?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that the stereotypes that exist about Black parents have been around for a very long time. And so it's probably not surprising, it's, the stereotype of the absent father. And the mother who is either not interested or doesn't have anything to offer, or is toxic, is loud, is unhelpful. And I see it everywhere. I see it, when I was a classroom teacher, it's there in conversations that you hear amongst other teachers or amongst the school administrators. It's there when I'm as a parent and I'm waiting in my, kids' school's office, and I see how staff members interact with, Black parents that are coming in there, to see things. It's with my pre-service teachers, who sometimes are just so terrified, who don't understand how to do things. And so, that is the misconception, because what I see are, parents who are, who are very involved in their children's lives. It might look different, from other parents, but I see them being, very involved, very interested. Certainly there are parents that might be intimidated by schools sometimes, and very, and it makes sense because they've had such poor experiences when they were students with schools. And so, they may be resistant. They may not believe that it matters, them trying to do, because they've been traumatized themselves from schools. Or maybe they've been traumatized, by adults interacting with them, a certain way. So, same thing, right? If a mom comes up to the school dressed a certain way, she won't be taken, seriously. I've I've thought about that myself, as a Black woman. I'm like, oh, I better make sure I am dressed a certain way. I've told a story with Brian, like one time I had to take the kids to the doctor and I was dressed in some sweatpants or something. And I was like, oh, I better talk with a British accent or something if I'm going to be taken seriously here. Because it's a real thing, and you're trying to, and I think that Black parents know this, and we're trying to protect our kids from certain things. And so it's like certain kind of energy, may be perceived a certain way, but it's the same thing with the kids too, right? Like it's this energy and a way of like talking and being real with things that's then kind of cut down, and maybe it's seen as disrespectful or something. So certainly, I mean, I think that what you think it is still what it is, as far as like parents, how they're getting treated and everything, in schools.
That reminds me, you probably can tell the story better than I can, but it reminds me of the Memphis news story when we as parents like really first got attuned to the potential threat of COVID-19 in some of the schools, and some of the news reports they were showing around parents that were coming to the school and I think literally like spraying their children with with disinfectant and coming like fully covered in plastic, and how it was almost made a mockery.
Mm-hmm.
But then, weeks later, we understood that, hey, in one form or another, that's actually what you need to do, right?
Yep.
You need to disinfect the environment and, cover. So maybe I already did the spoiler, but do you want to just add more commentary to just like how that dynamic plays out, of how when we do the right thing, it still is seen as a mockery?
That's right. That's it. That's exactly right. And so, and that was a story that went like viral, like nationally, because I had friends calling me from, all over the country. And I was like, that's my kid's school, where that was happening. But certainly, I mean, like, yeah, so now we're talking about like media portrayals, and that's just like, fresh meat for them, to kind of come and kind of, they see an opportunity to do things. But when it was happening, Brian and I were saying, we were like, they're onto something, because we don't know what this is, and there were, several of us like who opted to keep our kids home. And let me just back up and give a little bit of the story. So what happened was, our kids' school at the time, it was the first school in our city that had a case of where a staff member was exposed to COVID-19, right? And this was back at the beginning, right? So no one knew anything. And, the idea of someone being exposed to something, everyone was like, what does this mean? And so like some parents, received phone calls, and some opted to keep their kids home. We were, we're parents that we have certain privileges, and so we're able to do that. So we kept our kids, home, that day. Others maybe weren't for certain reasons, or they didn't get the message. But this particular day, so the news came to the school because the school, had been, had some kind of, someone had been exposed. And so the news was there. They were kind of like interview like parents and everything. And, you know, the news, they kind of amp people up anyway, right? Like they're trying to get people going. They get entertained by Black parents and Latino parents as well that were there, trying to get them to, you know, say certain things and do certain things. And so, yeah, so like some parents were all covered up in garbage bags, and another dad was like spraying, you know, around his son and everything. And those are the images that go viral, right? Those are the images that go viral. But again, instead of, you know, kind of taking a step back and saying this could be right, because no one knows. At that point, no one knew. So to assume that because these Black and Latino parents are doing this, that must be the wrong thing. Like that's a funny thing to do, instead of saying they may be onto something, you know? So this is an example of how of things happen all the time. When it comes back around, it was like they were right.
Man, that's a deep story. And, you know, just thinking of the hundreds of thousands of stories that happen over time, you know, that land in a similar way. I want to pivot back to that point around you spoke something strong early in relationship to, you know, the peer review articles. Like if you were to go looking specifically for, you know, elements tied to Black parenting, Black students, most of that, those topics of conversation will be based on negative experiences that or deficit experiences, topics tied to Black families. And, you know, the correlation, because again, a lot of our work is around marketing and the intentionality of, you know, what's marketed to our people and how it's marketed, and protecting ourselves from those very intentional strategies to feed that poison to us. And it's deep, that correlation between the relationship between even what's done in education to corporate America. You know, I oftentimes have even like looked at the scenarios around, you know, education, certain elements of the education system and policing families and students and schools versus like how, you know, we interact with law enforcement and community. You know, it's deep with these parallels. So, you know, that just struck me strongly, that even as we talk about, you know, research and this education, like there's a very intentional interest where folks are looking to, you know, continue certain narratives about us and about our children, and how that supports, you know, something larger at play for our communities and for our people. So that's just profound that you brought that up. So I wondered if you could touch on that, and then I have a follow-up around some of your recommendations. So to our listeners out here, the audience, future family, like I said, parents, current parents and future parents, but just as you're thinking about the nuances and stresses of navigating education systems, what are some of the greatest things that you've come across in your time? And when you get to that point, I want to talk about something called telomeres and racial battle fatigue, because this relationship to what the fatigue of what we deal with in these settings, and then the way, you know, I think parent groups have supported each other. So, you know, if you could just go back and touch on a little bit of that kind of marketing, messaging around the deficit of us first, and then if we could pivot and come back to that other point around what you've seen as groups of parents have, you know, worked to support each other in this process.
Sure. Yeah. So one thing that I've realized, I think, in all these different roles I've played in, in education, is that everything really is, you know, connected. And then beyond education, right? So like, you know, we talk about things being systemic. So like, you know, a system of education, and then like, you know, healthcare and the economy and everything. So all of these things are very much intertwined and connected. So much of research, you know, influences, of course, what's being taught to future educators, and that influences what is being taught to kids, like what curriculum is there. It has to be rooted, quote unquote, rooted in some type of research. You know, so much of the research that's being done, so much, not everything, but so much of the research that's being done, you know, it's not necessarily coming from this pure place of people who have this vast understanding, you know, of of history and of, how all these things kind of work together. So often they are motivated, by how much writing they can get out, how many publications they can get, right? And there's so many ways to write things, using certain numbers and certain statistics, it's easy to get out. And so that really impacts a lot of what gets out and gets told. The kind of research that I'm interested in, the qualitative, it takes a lot longer, to think through and to produce. And then there's the game of actually who will publish. A lot of places, they don't want to publish this type of work. They only are interested in numbers. So for example, educators, educator researchers are a part of a huge organization, AERA, the American Education Research Association. And so I'm bringing it up today because a lot of people just got their notices whether or not their research is going to be presented at the next conference. It's a huge thing in our field and everything, right? And it influences a lot of these things that we're talking about. And I was having to glance at Twitter quickly to see what people were talking about. I like to kind of stay, stay current. Like what are people saying on the Twitter streets? What's going on, with the academics and stuff. And so of course people are sharing that theirs got accepted, theirs didn't. But like even in this big space, it's only certain pockets of that space, that are kind of more open to certain kinds of research that's happening, right? Even when they tried, of course, since last year, buzzwords are like equity is like a big thing. And that's often like the theme of certain things. But when you get down to the nitty gritty of how this works with individual people having to approve, certain research and stories that go out, it's really only happening still in certain pockets. So there's still lots of gatekeepers there that people don't believe it, they just don't believe it actually is true. And so that's a huge thing, right? And so, and just I think how we saw they were saying this whole racial awakening and whatever, people realizing for the first time that things are bad, for certain groups. And it happens in education as well. People all of a sudden they have these moments and they have their eyes open, right? But that's years after so much harm has been done. And then even then it's well, now you're a little baby. Now you have a lot of work that you need to do. And yet you still have this power that you have, and that you're making these decisions and that you're doing all these things. So it's all really, I could talk forever about it, but it's all, it's all connected. It's all tied up in things. And so, but if you're not in this field, if I weren't a former teacher, if I weren't in this field, I wouldn't know necessarily about how all of this works, And if I were someone kind of just going in and really trying to trust that I'm believing and my kid's teacher does this, and you wouldn't know that these things are always happening necessarily. Now, what you do have is your gut still, right? And you have oh, this doesn't seem right, or this is happening. And then after years of kind of trying to do things, you might, kind of come to some more kind of understandings and stuff. But definitely, it's all connected there. And while there's definitely some really good stuff happening, and there's some good people, and they're doing some good work, I think it's still it's the minimum, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just to your point, a lot of good folks, right? Mm-hmm. This agenda tied to a very specific propaganda, that this narrative has to be pushed, and it's powerful when you talk about what starts with research, and and how that supports literally messaging that goes out far beyond the actual education field itself, but supports this larger narrative of what others believe about our community, and sometimes seeps into what we end up believing about our own selves. And so we're really sensitive to stuff like that, but appreciative for you doing the work, and bringing it to light. Like you said, had you not been in the space that you're in, that might not be something that you're aware of, but because you're there, what that means for all of us. When there's plenty of cases where you talked about gut and intuition, where I knew something was true, but I maybe couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't have the factual evidence, but I knew all along that's what I was dealing with. So just to close the loop, That's so important what we're talking about in regards to the power of imagery and marketing, and stories and narrative. And if we couple that with, some of the things that families can do and communities can do to organize and support one another, or just on my own, what I might as a parent, want to do with my child, that element of the fatigue of dealing with these sorts of things so much, and the exhaustion that goes along with it, and the impact on my own personal health, as well as the health of my community. This work around the telomere that I had learned about, where basically the telomere sits at the end of the DNA strand. And, it was discovered that, you can literally measure somebody's life outcome. And one of the things, not only can they shrink, but, in aging wise, but they can grow back. And one of the things that they saw grew telomeres back was, the elimination of toxic stress. And racial battle fatigue is a toxic stress that we deal with in our societies. Our babies deal with it, adults deal with it on every level. So I learned that some of the original researchers, they discovered their control group, a group of mothers as well. But one of the things that these mothers really wanted, single mothers, was just some time to, have a support group with other mothers who had similar situations, and they laugh, cry, talk about stories, support each other. But they noticed over time that those telomeres grew back. So I just was curious to know, based upon the work that you're doing in both of those spaces, like, what are some good things that, you gathered from there that can be useful and have utility, to our audience out here when it comes to navigating educational systems and parenting?
Yeah, so I'm going to say two things. So one thing I'll say quickly, this is back connected with, educational research, with that, what you just said. So one of the ways that I'm trying to structure, how to kind of produce this new knowledge is exactly that. And so it's looking at the peace and the safety that comes with, for example, like Black moms getting together with other Black moms. And so like that becomes like the space that I'm interested in talking to them and learning, from them. So instead of just doing like an isolated kind of like one-on-one, I'm going to record this, it's like, no, I want us to talk together, and I want us to learn from each other, because talking to each other, like exactly what you said, it kind of helps you to feel safer, and then it helps you to process what you are experiencing and what you're learning. And so that's one piece that I'm working on, as far as like how I gather information. It was impossible to do during the COVID restrictions, but I'm hoping that, of course, things will get back where we can do that. Okay, now in real life, kind of doing this work. Oh, for sure. And I think that's been the case, since the first Africans were, kidnapped and forced to come over here, right? It's like working together and leaning on each other, and like trusting the truth that, and like keeping, and having to say that over and over again, and reminding, yourself, your girlfriends of that, your kids, your spouse, whatever, like just like that has to be a part of what we kind of say to ourselves, and so I think that what y'all are talking about was like stories and like narratives and things, so, Brian and I have 3 kids, and we certainly don't always get it right, but we work very hard to try to think about, I think, like what we, like what is the story that they're going to experience in their life and everything, what's going to be their story. And so thinking back, like, okay, well, how do we set them up so that, we don't want them to have all of this, right? All this like racial trauma, of course. How can we kind of set them up for some things? I think that in many ways, like this is the struggle that a lot of Black parents are having. It's this like, because there's no perfect solution available for all of us to be able to have access to, right? I think that it's a big conversation that we could certainly have another time, but today in this moment or whatever, like it's not a situation where all of our people have certain access to certain things that we might argue could be the quote unquote perfect solution, right? So Black parents are trying to figure out, how do we, what can we sacrifice? Like what is going to be, it's not perfect. So what can we like kind of live with, and then what are we going to do to supplement whatever is being taken away from that kind of sacrifice. And so and that's really what everyone is doing, is pushing and pull, trying to figure out, for their kids. But I think that one of the things that we really try to do is think about like images that we have, in their rooms, even from when they were babies, what's going to be on their walls, like what kind of books are we bringing in? What are we reading to them? What are we, we're searching for like some Black cartoons, and we're like, oh my gosh, we found a Black cartoon. Look at this Black cartoon and stuff, and trying to do things. And then, talking to them about things, answering their questions. But then I also think, like, I love the terms, and I don't know who coined it, but like the whole terms of, Black boy joy and the Black girl magic, and, like letting them really be these kids and letting them be whatever kind of quirky or weirdness or whatever kind of fun stuff, that they're doing, like recognizing like their humanity in all of this. And everything doesn't have to just be about, I don't know, this like Black history moment type thing or something like that. And that also is connected with the fatigue part too, Jason, because I was just telling Brian the other day, I was like, Kerrigan said this, and I was like, I was so tired, I couldn't even get into it to like try to correct her. I've got to circle back to that later, but I was just so tired. But I think that like when we think about just like real things that we can do, I mean, like when you have a new, when you're getting a new baby, is just being careful about like what's surrounding them and everything. And just, making sure that like what they're watching, so that you can talk to them about it, like push questions. And then we even go as far as like we do kind of have these times where like we are making sure that that we are reading certain things to them, that we're going to sit and watch certain things as a family to make sure they understand. When they have questions about things, we want to stop and listen, all the time. So those are some quick things, I think as a parent, again, we don't always get it right, but we try hard to, to do that. But talking to other Black parents, locally, and like what you all are doing, like listening to, podcasts, and I mean, groups on social media can be helpful for a lot of moms, to kind of like, just kind of figure out, to know you're not alone in things. And then just to kind of get some advice. Of course, our community, our elders are like, always going to be like a big, hold on, give me 3 seconds, Bakari. We're trying to think
you got it. Thank
you. I can't think of the word. But they're going to be, capital for us. They are our capital, right? Our ancestors and our elders, like that's so much of our capital that we have, because they really are like so wise, and they have been through it. And the older I get, I realize all the time, like, I get it now. I get it so much and everything. So
no, that's so powerful. And I know B's coming on with a question for you. Just intention, 2 words that kept coming strong to me: intentional and unapologetic in the process, and so, just shout out to all the Black moms out there, holding us down in community in all the ways that you're speaking to. But yeah, thank you.
So, for this first question, I'm gonna be a parent, and I'm also gonna be a third person questioner. So you talked about Black boy joy a little earlier. Our son Camden is in the 5th grade, and I see him exhibiting a lot of Black boy joy. I see him exhibiting a lot of just love of life without necessarily the full weight of some of the stressors that come along with understanding clearly, what's going on around you. I remember that, I think it was for me, I think around 6th grade, when I think back and I remember like the first time I really began to start to, feel some of those things in a more intense way. And, part of me wants to protect Camden from that. I want to see him just, be able to come home and get on his, Roblox and game and code and not be worried about certain things. there's another part of me, that just says, all right, it's time to expose them to that. So it's attention, you know what I mean? And we do expose them
Yeah.
already, it's the things you've talked about. We expose them a lot. The experiential part, I think, is where I'm going also. What are your thoughts, and what have you seen around parents just being able to help navigate that tension within themselves, and also be able to navigate the transition when their children, their boys in particular, are getting more exposure and more experience and more and more of those stressors, really starting to hit home for them.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is, from other moms that I've spoken to who have sons that are older, is that people are fearful. Like parents are very scared of what might happen. Oh gosh, I think I'm getting teary-eyed too, thinking about it, of what could happen to our kids when they're not with, directly with us and everything. And so that's the first thing, is that there's a real fear that exists, of our kids, like in school, our kids just out having fun, exhibiting Black boy joy. And so we want to hold them tight. We want to hold them close, right? And I want to just be clear. I mean, this fear is rooted in real things that, that our kids are at risk for. And especially when you think about, Black boys who might have, certain dyslexia abilities and everything. I've got one of our close friends, one of our godsons is, he's African-American boy, he's autistic. And, just thinking about the struggles that come because certain, societal views about that and institutions that exist and these expectations around, understanding language immediately and being able to comply immediately in the way that looks a certain way. And so I think that, so I think his fear is there for sure. So that's the first thing I think of, is a fear. And then once I get past that, knowing that, okay, yeah, but he is, he's growing up and he's going to be a teenager, he's going to be a young man, and this is life and everything. So I don't think I'm there yet, Brian. I don't know, as far as me as a mom. I think that you asking this question is really getting me to think about that. I think that I'm still in the place where I just want to hold them, to me. But I think that it is a struggle that everyone goes through. I have another girlfriend who's, she was like, listen, my son just grew 1.5 inches in 6 months. He's just about my height now, and what that means. And, and he's 12 and what that means. And so I think in my close circle of moms, we're all kind of still upper elementary, little lower. So we're still kind of, well, we're about to get to this point, I think, where these questions about, okay, they're getting older and they're going to be exposed to things, because the other thing is their friends are getting older too, right? And so, and especially, and they're going to be wanting to watch and engage with more mature material and everything. So I think that part of it is, I think getting them prepared and kind of maybe being on the predicting side of it and trying to get in front of it. But then also it's just for being there to respond to them. And that's why it's so important that we build these relationships with them when they're younger, right? So that they know that you come to us, you tell us things, that we talk together, and you don't have to fear asking us these kind of questions. I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm gonna stop there because you got me thinking about my own situation.
Man, it's so strong. It's so strong, B, that you brought that up. And Keishana, that you're speaking to it. So just yesterday, my son, he wanted to go, he's 14, right? And he wanted to go, Halloween trick-or-treating with his peer group. And it's wild because before I could just say yes, which, I wanted to say to him, we had to have this whole long conversation of what the threats that he might encounter from just being out in space. Like you talked about peer group, or just who he might encounter, who might, view him as older than he is, or, just all those different things that I might not be able to be there to control over. And I've had these conversations with both of my sons so many times. And I wonder, like, man, at what point is it just like, do I start sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher? But I really want to make sure that they're good, because I know what they may face out there beyond just their peer group, but just in society. So that resonates. That's such a strong conversation when you say that, B, when you bring that up, because like these are real things that we're talking about. And we also talking about the innocence and the dreams of our children, and how long they're able to remain in that innocence and being cool with who they are. So that question hits me heavy too, bro. So I can relate to the struggle.
Yeah. I actually, as I was asking that, I was thinking about some of our conversations, Jay, where, you're the elder to me in raising boys, you know what I mean? And so I know those tensions that you deal with older boys, and just trying to, get prepared for those myself. So, Keishana, another thing, and I kind of referenced on your story earlier. I'm gonna go back to it again. With our Own Your Story initiative, we really phase into three parts. It's about us being able to situate correctly the past. In our minds, it is to speak truth to the current reality and counter the false narratives and projections. But the thing that gets us most excited is being able to paint the picture of the future, to own and take control and hold over what we're walking into. So as it relates to parenting, if you're an artist, with your canvas to be able to paint, what does parenting look like on our own terms in the future? Like, where are we going? What are we aspiring to, where the parenting across our community looks like this, in a way that we know is going to be healthy for us, for our children, for our community? What's that picture look like in your head?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the one word that stands out to me is the word community. I think like in that, and kind of really trying to, dig deep within ourselves, our ancestors, our history, and like, and just this idea of, of the village and of community, and really like loving each other and trusting each other, and like parenting in that way. Because I think that, it can't be done alone. Like, we can't do it by ourselves. We can't do it like within isolation, as much as we try to like hold them and hide them and everything, we're just intertwined now. Like everything is we're with others. And so I think that, to be in community, I think with each other is really important. And I know, like for us, coming to the city where we are and without family here, that was really important, for us, was to find this community, that we have here, with so many other Black families, Black parents and everything. And it's just this understanding of, if I'm over here talking, I know another mom is over there where my kid is and everything, and they've got them and everything. So I think, so I don't know, I mean, with specifics and stuff, I don't know, but I do think like this word community really like stands out to me, and it feels like that's needed. And I feel like it works. Like if we really do kind of like, allow ourselves to, to believe that, right. And to trust each other, and to know that, we need each other, to do this work and everything.
I was thinking about the spirit of, bringing back some of not everything from the past do we need to do away with. Matter of fact, there's multiple things that were really good for us. And thinking about that element of like community parenting, right? Where, we had each other's back. And, within, what is, acceptable and responsible, we just taking care of each other's children and each other in the process. And so as you were painting that picture, that element of like community parenting just was sitting real strong in my spirit. And that just resonates, really, really important for the future of where we'll be. So, as we can ready to close out the today's episode, and it's been such a rich conversation. We might need a part 2, B, because I'm not ready to close it out, man, with you, Keishana. But is there anything else that you would say is really important for our community to know and think about now as we want to walk into that future self? In your personal experiences parenting, as you're working with these focus groups, as you're doing the research, as you're also in higher learning, higher ed, what is it that you think, a parent right now walking into a school, this would be good for you to have with you as you go into those spaces? What do you want our community to know?
Yeah. If I choose one thing, I think that the school element is a major part of this, and so I think that I would encourage other educators, people who have this kind of knowledge and understanding, to be a resource for other parents, because we know what goes on in the schools. Like, we really do know what's happening. And so there's so many, like, there's a ton of good things. I never want to come across as I'm just like bashing individual people and everything, right? In many ways, like, so many schools are truly doing the best they can. But unfortunately, the best is far from good enough, and it can be very harmful, and so I think that schooling piece and the education piece is just really, really going to be key, for so many things. And so, and as I'm saying that, it's interesting because I always say this, but then, like, I don't have the answer to it. Like, I don't have it where I'm like, so what you need to do is, this, right? Like, because there really isn't, there's not anything readily available that everyone has access to that can, where it's like an easy answer. So I think that if we just kind of keep, coming together, using our resources together, and for some of us, it's going to be our knowledge and experience, I think, with schools. And so for, those parents who don't have that, I think, reach out to people who kind of know, like, what's, what the deal is. Don't equate a good school with good test scores. Like, that doesn't mean it's a safe place for your child or it's the best place for your child. Don't use these reviews online as like the end all be all. Go in and meet, request a visit, request to sit inside classrooms and to observe, like, what's happening. Ask about teachers' license information and experiences, ask the questions that you want to know, and see what's out there. Because every like individual school is going to be a little bit different. But the same things are happening in every city across the country and everything. So I would just say that, and I don't have the answers for everything, but I'm definitely someone, if I can ever help, someone who's trying to kind of like navigate, these questions and everything, I'm always happy to, try to do what I can do on an individual level as well.
Man, that was a mic dropper right there. You said, don't equate good test scores with good schooling. Don't equate that, and make that assumption. And that message of, like, be actively involved, be in the face of the space where our babies are at. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you today. I'm gonna say this part here, and I got to give it over to my brother, to your king, the king. We got the king and queen on the call today. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in with us. Please tap in with Tandem Ed Network at tandemed.com. Follow us on IG and Twitter. Also, hashtag Black Terms and Own Your Story. And until next time, live, learn, and lead on our terms, on Black terms, y'all. Peace and light. But I got to give the final word over to my brother, B. Take us out, bro.
Yeah. So the last thing I'll say is, we've been able to do this podcast and do this research, through questioning, asking Keishana questions. But I get a chance to watch in real life an example of strong parenting. So Keishana, you're teaching every day what it means to be a strong parent. And you're doing a wonderful job. In my eyes, you're doing a wonderful job with our children and raising them. And I, am just thrilled and honored to be on a journey with you. So let's keep it going. And I'm sure there's more research and books and articles and presentations to come that are going to serve our community. So love you for that.